The galactic community had watched humanity for almost 100 years before they decided to make contact. The Valanthic Collective was a group of 17 different alien species who had been traveling through space for thousands of years. They had found and studied thousands of intelligent races across the galaxy. To them, humans were nothing special. They were a young species who had only recently learned how to travel between stars. They had a few small colonies near their home system, but nothing impressive. Ambassador Kira Dawson was the first human to stand before the Valanthi High Assembly. The meeting took place on a massive space station, floating above the alien homeworld. Kira was a small woman, especially when compared to the other beings in the room. The Cathari delegates were tall, insect-like creatures with hard shells and multiple arms. The Morvathi were beings made of living crystal that glowed with soft light. Kira stood among these giants with her head held high and her voice calm. "We come here looking for trade, for knowledge, and for friendship," she said. A small device behind her ear translated her words into the many languages of the assembly. Humanity has much to learn from the older races of the galaxy. The high speaker was a Valanthi elder named Tolvith. His species looked somewhat human, but with gray skin, very long heads, and 4 pale eyes instead of 2. He had no nose, just 2 small slits above his thin mouth. He looked down at Kira with an expression that was hard to read. "Your kind is aggressive," he said in a flat voice. "Your history is filled with blood. You have fought war after war. You kill each other over land, over ideas, even over the color of your skin." Kira did not look away or show any sign of being upset. "That is true," she said simply. "We do not hide from our past." "Then you must understand why we are not sure about accepting you." "I understand completely." Kira paused for a moment before continuing. "But I would ask you to think about something." "Yes. Our history is violent. Yes, we have fought terrible wars. We have come close to destroying ourselves more than once. But we are still here. Every time we faced destruction, we chose to survive instead. We learned from our mistakes. We changed. We built something better from the ruins." The assembly began to whisper among themselves. Tolvith raised one of his long hands, and the room became quiet again. "You talk about holding back your violent nature," he said, "but your species still has armies. You still build weapons of war." "We do," Kira admitted without shame, "and we hope every single day that we will never have to use them. But we keep them because the universe has taught us one very important lesson." She looked directly into Tolvith's 4 eyes. "Hope for peace. Prepare for the alternative." That day, humanity was allowed to join the collective, but only as observers. They could trade with other species. They could travel through collective space. But they could not vote on important decisions. And they were not allowed to build any military bases outside their own territory. For 30 years, humanity accepted these rules without complaint. They traded fairly with everyone. They kept every promise they made. They worked hard to avoid any kind of conflict. When the Draxan hegemony started causing trouble at the border, human diplomats spent 18 months talking and negotiating instead of fighting back. The other species started to see humanity in a certain way. The Cathari warriors called them soft and weak. The Morvathi barely noticed they existed. Even the friendlier species thought humans were too scared of their own violent past to ever stand up for themselves. Captain Nathan Cole served on the exploration ship called Horizon's Edge. He spent 12 years flying near the edge of known space, mapping new systems and making contact with species that had never met humans before. He kept a personal journal where he wrote down his thoughts about his missions and the aliens he encountered. "Think we are weak because we choose not to fight," he wrote one evening after a difficult meeting with the Cathari patrol. "They look at our patience and think it means we are cowards. They see our diplomats working for peace and think we are afraid to go to war." He paused in his writing and looked out the window at the stars. "I have served on the frontier for 12 years, he continued. "I have read the old histories. I know what happened when our ancestors ran out of peaceful options. I have seen the records of what humanity did when we were truly pushed to the edge. The aliens have not seen those records. They do not know. Nathan put down his pen and leaned back in his chair. I hope they never have to learn. Back on Earth, life continued as normal. Children went to school. People went to work. Families had dinner together and talked about ordinary things. The military kept training, kept building, kept preparing, but they did it quietly, out of sight. Most humans did not think much about war. They had grown up in a time of peace, and they expected that peace to continue. The government knew better. In secret meetings and classified reports, military leaders and politicians talked about the threats that existed beyond human space. They studied the Cathari Dominion and their aggressive expansion. They watched the Draxan hegemony and their constant border violations. They kept track of every species that might one day decide that humanity was an easy target. President Maria Santos received weekly briefings on the state of galactic affairs. She was a practical woman who believed in preparing for the worst while hoping for the best. Under her leadership, humanity had built up its defenses without making any public announcements. New ships were constructed in hidden shipyards. New weapons were developed in secret laboratories. New soldiers were trained in facilities that did not appear on any official map. We are not looking for a fight, she told her advisors during one meeting, but if a fight comes to us, we will be ready. Her advisors nodded in agreement. They had all studied human history. They knew what their species was capable of when pushed too far. They had seen the ruins of ancient cities destroyed by weapons that should never have been built. They had read about the millions who died in wars that could have been prevented. They also knew that sometimes, despite everyone's best efforts, war became unavoidable. When that day came, humanity would not be caught unprepared. For now, the galaxy saw humanity as peaceful and harmless. The young species that talked about friendship and trade. The newcomers who bent over backward to avoid conflict. The galaxy had no idea how wrong they were about the truth. And somewhere in the depths of space, events were already in motion that would teach them a lesson they would never forget. The trouble started in a region of space called the Arcturus Reach. Humanity had built colonies there about 20 years earlier. The planets were empty when humans arrived. No one lived there. No one wanted them. So humanity settled in and started building new homes for their growing population. The Cathari Dominion suddenly decided that the Arcturus Reach belonged to them. They claimed their ancestors had owned this territory long ago, even though they had abandoned it centuries before humans ever arrived. For years, they said nothing about these old claims. But then human miners found valuable minerals on several planets in the region. Suddenly, the Cathari remembered their interest in the Arcturus Reach. They sent a message to Earth with 3 demands. First, all humans must leave the region immediately. Second, humanity must give up all rights to mine the valuable minerals. Third, humanity must pay money to make up for stealing Cathari resources. Secretary of State Daniel Morrison sent a polite reply through official channels. We are happy to negotiate, he wrote. We recognize that the Cathari Dominion has historical connections to this region. We believe we can find an arrangement that benefits everyone. The Cathari ambassador was a warrior named Shrixtal. She was female, which in Cathari society meant she was part of the ruling class. She had 4 arms, a hard shell covering her body, and large eyes that saw in multiple directions at once. When she received humanity's reply, she was insulted. You do not negotiate with prey, she told her superiors. You hunt it. The first attack came without any warning. A swarm of Cathari warships appeared in the sky above a human colony called New Providence. The colony had only a few small defense ships. They were destroyed within minutes. Then the Cathari started bombing the planet. 8,000 civilians died in the first hour. Buildings collapsed. Hospitals burned. Schools turned to rubble. The people who survived the bombing had no time to mourn before Cathari soldiers landed on the surface. They rounded up 12,000 humans and loaded them onto transport ships. The Cathari often used other species as slave labor. To them, humans were just another resource to be harvested. The galactic community watched this happen and did almost nothing. The Valanthi High Assembly released a statement saying they were concerned about the situation. They encouraged both sides to find a peaceful solution. But they took no action to stop the Kethari or punish them for attacking civilians. Humanity tried one more time to solve the problem through talking. They sent a team of diplomats to meet with Cathari leaders. The diplomats brought offers of compromise and promises of fair treatment. The Cathari killed them all. They recorded the executions and sent the video to every human communication network. They wanted humanity to see what happened to those who tried to negotiate. President Maria Santos stood on the steps of the Capitol, building in Jean. VA cameras from every news organization on Earth were pointed at her. Billions of people watched as she prepared to speak. For 30 years, we have done everything possible to earn the respect of the galactic community, she began. Her voice was steady, but anyone who looked closely could see the anger in her eyes. We have accepted insults. We have swallowed our pride. We have watched our people be murdered while our so-called allies did nothing to help. She paused and took a breath. We did all of this because we believed in a better way. We still believe in peace. But we will not sacrifice our children for that belief. She looked directly into the main camera, as if she could see through it to every home on every world where humans lived. To the Cathari Dominion, I have one message. You have attacked our colonies. You have murdered our citizens. You have killed our diplomats. We tried everything we could think of to avoid this moment, everything. Jaw tightened, and her voice became harder. You should have listened when we asked you not to make us angry. Within hours of her speech, things started happening all across human space. Military bases that had been quiet for decades suddenly came alive with activity. Reserve soldiers who had thought they would never see combat received orders to report for duty. Factories that had been making civilian products switched to making weapons and ammunition, in shipyards hidden throughout human territory. Workers began preparing vessels that the galaxy had never seen. These ships had been built in secret over many years. They were bigger than anything humanity had ever shown to the other species. They carried weapons that existed only in theory among most alien civilizations. Deep beneath the surface of Luna, Earth's moon technicians entered vaults that had been sealed for 30 years. Inside those vaults were weapons that humanity had hoped would never be needed again. Devices that could destroy entire fleets. Bombs that could crack planets. Tools of war so terrible that the people who built them had nightmares about what might happen if they were ever used. Admiral Lisa Park received her orders while eating breakfast at her home. She was 54 years old and had spent her entire career in the military. But she had never seen real combat. None of the current generation of human officers had. They had trained for war. They had studied war. But they had always hoped that their training would never be put to the test. She put down her coffee cup and read the message again. You are hereby ordered to take command of the 3rd Fleet. Proceed to Assembly Point Delta. Prepare for combat operations in the Arcturus. Reach. Your mission is to liberate all human prisoners and neutralize Cathari military forces in the region. Lisa closed her eyes for a moment. She thought about all the history books she had read. All the stories of human warfare going back thousands of years. The battles and the sieges. The victories and the defeats. The moments when humanity had shown both its greatest courage and its darkest cruelty. She opened her eyes and stood up from the table. It begins, she said quietly to herself, on distant worlds. The Cathari celebrated their easy victory over the weak humans. Their warriors boasted about how quickly they had crushed the pathetic mammal defenders. Their leaders made plans for how they would divide up human space once the inevitable surrender came. They had no idea what was coming for them. They had poked what they thought was a sleeping lamb. They were about to discover they had awakened a sleeping wolf, and the wolf was very, very hungry. Admiral Lisa Park stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Resolute. This massive warship was the flagship of the 3rd Fleet, the largest military force humanity had ever assembled. Around her, officers worked at their stations with quiet efficiency. No one spoke unless they had something important to say. Everyone knew what was at stake. Lisa looked out the main viewing window at the fleet spread out before her. 247 warships hung in space, their hulls gleaming in the light of distant stars. 62 of them were the new Prometheus-class battlecruisers. These vessels were twice the size of anything humanity had ever shown to the galactic community. Each one carried enough firepower to destroy a small moon. "Fleet status report," Lisa called out. Commander Kevin Hughes checked his console. He was a young man, only 32 years old. But he had been chosen for this position because of his sharp mind and steady nerves. "All ships report ready, Admiral. Weapons charged. Shields at full power. Crews standing by for your orders." Lisa nodded slowly. "The Cathari have no idea what they have awakened." "Admiral?" Kevin looked at her with confusion in his eyes. "Nothing." She straightened her uniform and pushed her personal thoughts aside. "Set course for the Arcturus Reach. Maximum speed. It is time to bring our people home." The fleet jumped to faster-than-light speed and vanished from normal space. They arrived in the New Providence system 3 days later. The Cathari had left a large force to guard their conquest. 180 warships patrolled the area around the planet where thousands of human prisoners were being held. War Master Thextonel commanded the Cathari fleet. He was an old warrior who had fought in dozens of campaigns against other species. He had never lost a battle. When his sensors detected the approaching human fleet, he clicked his mandibles in amusement. "The mammals come to die," he announced to his crew. "Their ships are slow and weak. Their weapons cannot pierce our armor. This will be over quickly." He ordered his ships into attack formation and moved to intercept the human fleet. The two forces met in the space between the planet and its largest moon. The Cathari attacked first, launching swarms of missiles and firing their energy weapons at the approaching human vessels. The human ships did not try to dodge. They flew straight into the attack, their shields absorbing the incoming fire. Then they revealed their true capabilities. The Prometheus-class battlecruisers unveiled their main weapons. Gravitic lances shot out from their bows, invisible beams of force that twisted space itself. When these beams hit Cathari ships, they tore through shields and armor like they were made of paper. Entire vessels crumpled and collapsed as the gravity fields inside them went wild. From hidden launchers along the hulls of human ships, thousands of missiles emerged. Each missile was small, barely larger than a person, but each one carried an antimatter warhead. When they detonated against Cathari hulls, the explosions were brighter than stars. The battle became chaos. Cathari captains tried to coordinate their attacks, but their communication systems had stopped working. Human electronic warfare specialists had jammed every frequency the insects used to talk to each other. Ships that had fought together for decades suddenly found themselves alone and confused. War Master Thextonel watched in horror as his fleet was torn apart. His tactical display showed ship after ship winking out of existence. Green icons turned red, then black. In less than an hour, he had lost half his force. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "The humans are supposed to be weak." No one on his bridge could answer him. By the 3rd hour of battle, Thextonel ordered a retreat. His remaining ships turned and fled, abandoning their positions and their prisoners. By the 5th hour, his own flagship had taken critical damage. Fire spread through the lower decks. Power systems failed, one after another. By the 6th hour, the great warship was nothing but a burning wreck drifting through the void. Thextonel died surrounded by the bodies of his crew, still unable to understand what had happened. When the fighting ended, Admiral Park counted the losses. The Cathari had lost more than 12,000 warriors. Their fleet was scattered, broken, running for home. Human losses were 14 ships damaged, 2 destroyed, and fewer than 300 dead. Lisa watched from her bridge as rescue shuttles descended to the planet below. They would bring back the captured humans, the ones who had survived their imprisonment. She should have felt happy. They had won. They had saved their people. But she did not feel happy. She felt tired and sad. Commander Hughes approached her carefully. "Admiral, are you all right?" "They thought they knew us," Lisa said quietly. "They saw how we held back our anger and thought it meant we were weak. They did not understand. Understand what, Admiral? She turned to look at him. Her eyes were old, much older than her face. We were not weak, Commander. We were terrified. Terrified of what we would become if we ever let ourselves fight without limits. Terrified of the monster that lives inside every human being. The Cathari did not break our chains. They broke the lock on the cage where we keep our worst nature. Now, the cage is open. And the monster is hungry. News of the battle spread across the galaxy within days. Every species with access to communications networks heard about what had happened at New Providence. The quiet humans, the peaceful newcomers, had destroyed one of the most feared military forces in known space. The Valenthi High Assembly called an emergency meeting. High Speaker Talvith demanded to speak with the human observer, a young diplomat named Catherine Blake. Explain this to me, he said. His 4 eyes were wide with something that might have been fear. Your technology was supposed to be inferior to ours. Your military was rated as a minimal threat. How did you do this? Catherine smiled, but there was no warmth in it. With respect, High Speaker, you rated the technology we chose to show you. You assessed the military we allowed you to see. You lied to us. We simply did not share information that nobody asked for. She leaned forward in her seat. Humanity has been preparing for this day since we first looked up at the night sky and wondered if something dangerous might be looking back at us. We hoped that our preparations would never be needed. We prayed that peace would last forever. She paused and her smile faded away. We were wrong to hope, but we were right to prepare. The message was clear. Humanity was not the harmless species the galaxy had believed them to be. They had been hiding their true strength all along, waiting and hoping that they would never need to use it. Now the waiting was over, and the galaxy was about to learn just how dangerous a patient predator could be the Cathari. Dominion did not surrender after their defeat at New Providence. Their pride would not allow it. For thousands of years, they had been conquerors. They had crushed countless species and built an empire on the bones of their enemies. The idea of surrendering to mammals, 2 creatures they considered little better than animals, was unthinkable. Instead, they called for help. The Cathari reached out to every ally and every vassal state they had, accumulated over centuries of warfare. They promised rewards to those who joined them. They threatened punishment for those who refused. Within weeks, it assembled a coalition of hostile species united by one goal: the destruction of humanity. The Draxan. Moni joined first. They were a reptilian species known for their cruelty and their hunger for territory. They had been pushing against human borders for years, and saw this as their chance to finally take what they wanted. The Morvathi Consortium came next. These crystal beings cared nothing for territory or revenge. They simply saw an opportunity for profit. Human worlds had resources they wanted, and dead humans could not object to having those resources taken. 6 smaller powers added their fleets to the coalition. Some wanted revenge for past defeats. Some wanted to prove themselves to more powerful allies. Some were simply afraid of what the Cathari would do if they refused to help. Together, Coalition assembled the largest fleet the galaxy had seen in centuries. More than 2,000 warships gathered at the edge of human space, preparing to attack from multiple directions at the same time. Their plan was simple: strike fast at many targets, overwhelm human defenses before they could respond, destroy humanity's ability to fight back before they could use their terrible new weapons again. It was a reasonable plan. It might have worked against any other species, but humanity had not been idle in the weeks. Since New Providence, every human colony had been transformed into a fortress. Defense platforms orbited every inhabited world. Minefields protected every approach route. Ground forces had dug in with weapons capable of shooting down incoming ships, and the human fleet had grown. Shipyards worked around the clock, building new vessels and repairing damaged ones. Reserves had been called up from every corner of human space. The military that the galaxy had dismissed as insignificant now numbered more than 500 warships. With more being completed every day, the Coalition launched their attack on a Tuesday morning. Earth time. 3 separate fleets struck at 3 different targets. The first hit Epsilon Eridani, a major industrial center. The second targeted Tau Ceti, home to humanity's largest shipyard. The third, and largest, headed straight for Sol. The home system of the human species, at Epsilon Eridani, the Morvathi Crystal Fleet expected easy victory. Their ships were beautiful and deadly, living constructs of silicon and energy that could regenerate. Damage almost as fast as it was inflicted, the human defenders had studied the Morvathi carefully. They knew that crystal structures had natural weaknesses. Certain frequencies of sound and vibration could shatter them. Human scientists had spent years developing weapons that exploited these weaknesses. When the Morvathi fleet arrived, they were met by ships carrying sonic cannons and harmonic missiles. The crystal vessels that had seemed so invincible began to crack and break apart. Beautiful structures that had taken centuries to grow shattered into fragments within seconds. The Battle of Epsilon Eridani lasted for hours. The Morvathi lost 60% of their force before retreating. At Tau Ceti, the Draxan hegemony attempted a different approach. Rather than attacking the system directly, they tried to sneak in with a small force of stealth ships. Their plan was to strike at the shipyards while the main human fleet was distracted elsewhere. They did not know that humanity had developed sensors, capable of detecting their stealth technology. The moment the Draxan ships entered the system, human defenders knew exactly where they were. Special Forces teams boarded the Draxan flagship in the chaos of battle. Within an hour, they had captured the fleet admiral and taken control of the ship. The remaining Draxan vessels, suddenly, without leadership, fell into confusion. Many surrendered. Others fled. None achieved their objective. But the main battle, the one that would decide the fate of humanity, took place in the Sol system itself. Fleet Admiral Gregory Harris commanded the defense of Earth. He was an old man, 72 years old, with white hair and a face lined by decades of service. He had spent his entire career studying military history, reading about the great battles of humanity's past. He had always hoped that his knowledge would never be needed. Now it was the Coalition fleet, now jumped into Sol space with more than 1,000 ships. They outnumbered the human defenders 3-1. Their commanders were confident of victory. They should not have been. Hidden weapons. Platforms activated throughout the asteroid belt. These stations had been built in secret over 30 years, disguised as mining facilities and research posts. Each one carried enough firepower to destroy a battleship. Stealth destroyers emerged from behind Jupiter's moons. These ships had been waiting for weeks, running silent, invisible to all sensors. They struck at the Coalition's flanks without warning, their torpedoes tearing into unprepared targets. Around Earth itself, the planetary defense grid came online. Thousands of satellites and orbital stations linked together into a network of overlapping fire zones. Any ship that approached the planet would have to fly through a wall of weapons fire, and at the center of the human formation sat a ship unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Archangel was massive. It dwarfed every other vessel in the system, human or alien. Its hull was covered with weapon emplacements. Its engines could push it to speeds that seemed impossible for something so large. Inside its armored core were weapons that bordered on the impossible. Admiral Harris broadcast a message to the Coalition fleet. This is Fleet Admiral Gregory Harris of the United Earth Defense Force. You have entered human space with hostile intent. I am offering you one chance to withdraw. Take it. The Coalition commander, a Cathari admiral named Vixrel, responded with contempt. We will feast on your world's corpse, mammal. Harris nodded slowly. I hoped you would say that. The battle that followed lasted 11 hours. It was the largest space engagement in recorded galactic history. Thousands of ships fought across millions of kilometers. Weapons that had never been used in combat were deployed. Tactics that existed only in theory were put into practice. When the fighting finally ended, the Coalition had lost 412 ships. The human fleet had lost 60-3. Among the destroyed enemy vessels were all the ships that had been guarding the Cathari homeworld. Every single one had been recalled to participate in the attack on Earth. For the first time in 5,000 years, Ketheri home system was undefended. President Santos sent one final message to the Dominion. Surrender now. Release all human prisoners. Accept our terms, or face the consequences. The Ketheri refused. 3 days later, a human fleet appeared in orbit above their homeworld. They did not drop bombs. They did not fire weapons. Instead, they deployed a device called the Silence. Every electronic system on the planet stopped working. Power grids failed. Communications went dead. Machines that had run for centuries simply stopped in a single moment, without killing anyone. Humanity had brought an empire to its knees. The Ketheri surrendered within hours. The war changed everything. For thousands of years, the galaxy had operated according to certain rules. The strong took from the weak. The powerful crushed those who opposed them. Species rose and fell based on their ability to fight. Violence was the ultimate argument. Those with the biggest weapons won every debate. Humanity had shattered those rules completely. The Ketheri Dominion, which had terrified hundreds of species for 5,000 years, was dismantled, piece by piece. Their military was reduced to a small defense force barely capable of protecting their own borders. Their conquered peoples were set free. Their leaders were arrested and put on trial for the crimes they had committed against humanity and others. The Draxan hegemony and the Morvathi consortium paid heavy prices for their part in the coalition. They were forced to give resources to humanity as payment for the damage they had caused. Human observers were placed on their governing councils to make sure they followed the rules. They had thought they could profit from humanity's destruction. Instead, they had lost more than they could have imagined. The smaller powers that had joined the coalition were treated more gently. Most of them had been forced or frightened into participating. Humanity understood that they had acted out of fear rather than hatred. They were allowed to return to their normal lives, as long as they promised never to threaten human space again. But the biggest change was not political or military. The biggest change was in how the other species viewed humanity. High Speaker. Tolvith requested a private meeting with Ambassador Kira Dawson. She had returned to Valanthos Prime as humanity's chief representative to the galactic community. The same woman who had first spoken to the Assembly 30 years ago now came back as the voice of the most feared species in known space. They met in a small room, overlooking the orbital station's main viewing deck. Stars filled the window, thousands of points of light against the endless black. Tolvith looked tired. His gray skin had faded to an unhealthy pale color. His 4 eyes seemed clouded with exhaustion. He had aged decades in the past few months. "I owe you an apology," he said. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "When your people first came to us, I thought you were primitives. Dangerous primitives, perhaps, but still primitives. I thought your peaceful nature was a sign of weakness. I thought your diplomacy meant you were afraid to fight. I thought your patience meant you were too stupid to know when you were being insulted." Kira sat across from him, her hands folded in her lap. Many species thought the same thing. I was wrong. He met her eyes with all 4 of his own. Your restraint was never weakness. It was the opposite. It was strength beyond anything I have ever seen in my long life. You knew what your species was capable of. You knew the terrible things sleeping inside your nature, and you did everything in your power to keep those things locked away. "Yes," Kira said simply. "The locks are broken now." Kira was quiet for a long moment. Outside the window, a transport ship drifted past, carrying passengers to destinations across the galaxy. "For the Ketheri." "Yes." "They gave us no choice." She leaned forward slightly. "But I want you to understand something, High Speaker. What you saw in this war was not our full strength. It was not us fighting without limits. It was us doing the absolute minimum necessary to end the threat." Tolvis's eyes widened. If we had truly unleashed everything we are capable of, there would be no Ketheri species anymore. Not a single one would be left alive. Their world would be a dead rock floating in space. Their name would be erased from history. No one would even remember they existed. The High Speaker went pale. His hands trembled slightly. "Then why did you hold back?" Because that is not who we choose to be. Kira stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. Humanity has spent its entire existence fighting against its own worst nature. Every step of progress we have ever made has been a battle against the darkness inside us. We do not pretend that darkness does not exist. We simply refuse to let it control us. She turned back to face him. We will never start a war. We will always try to find a peaceful answer to every problem. We will work as hard as we can to avoid conflict. But if someone forces us to fight, if they leave us no other option, we will end the fight quickly, completely, permanently. Her voice hardened. And then we will go back to being the quiet, peaceful species that everyone thought they could push around. In the years that followed, the galaxy learned to live with this new reality. Humanity did not seek to build an empire. They did not demand that other species bow to them or pay tribute. They simply wanted to be left alone to live their lives in peace. They became something that the galaxy had never seen before. A peaceful species that everyone was afraid to anger. When disputes arose between other powers, human diplomats were often called in to help find solutions. Both sides knew that if they failed to reach an agreement, humanity might decide to end the argument for them. This knowledge made everyone much more willing to compromise. The old ways of the galaxy slowly began to change. The strong could no longer simply take from the weak. The powerful could no longer crush anyone who annoyed them. Violence stopped being the ultimate argument, because everyone knew that if they pushed too far, if they made the humans angry, the consequences would be terrible. Ambassador Dawson gave one final speech to the Valanthe High Assembly before retiring from diplomatic service. She stood in the same chamber where she had first introduced humanity to the galaxy 3 decades earlier. When I first came here, I told you that humanity believes in a simple principle: hope for peace. Prepare for the alternative. She looked around the room at the hundreds of alien faces watching her. Some of you thought this meant we were weak. You thought we talked about peace because we were afraid to fight. She smiled, but there was old sadness in her eyes. You were wrong. We talked about peace because we were afraid of what would happen if we had to fight. We prepared for war because we knew better than anyone how terrible war could be. We held back our anger because we knew what that anger could do if it was ever set free. She paused, letting the silence stretch. Humanity is not a prey species pretending to be peaceful. We are a predator species choosing to be peaceful. There is all the difference in the universe between those two things. She looked around the chamber one last time. Remember that? Remember what happened to those who forgot it? And ask yourselves if you really want to find out what we will do if the next threat pushes us even further. No one answered. No one needed to. The universe had learned its lesson. The quiet humans, the patient newcomers, the species that had asked so nicely to be left in peace, had shown what they were truly capable of, and no one in the galaxy was foolish enough to test them again. In the end, humanity got exactly what they had always wanted. They got peace. They got safety. They got the chance to explore the stars and build new homes among them. They just had to remind the universe why making them angry was a very, very bad idea. Some lessons have to be taught the hard way. This one would never be forgotten.